Socialism may be established by force, as in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or by vote, as in Nazi National Socialist Germany. The degree of socialization may be total, as in Russia, or partial, as in England. Theoretically, the differences are superficial. Practically, they are only a matter of time. The basic principle in all cases is the same. The alleged goals of socialism were the abolition of poverty, the achievement of general prosperity, progress, peace, and human brotherhood. The results have been a terrifying failure. Terrifying, that is, if one's motive is men's welfare. Instead of prosperity, socialism has brought economic paralysis and or collapse to every country that tried it. The degree of socialization has been the degree of disaster. The consequences have varied accordingly. England, once the freest and proudest nation of Europe, has been reduced to the status of a second-rate power and is perishing slowly from hemophilia, losing the best of her economic blood, the middle class and the professions. The able, competent, productive, independent men are leaving by the thousands, migrating to Canada or the United States in search of freedom. They are escaping from the reign of mediocrity, from the mawkish poorhouse where, having sold their rights in exchange for free dentures, the inmates are now whining that they'd rather be red than dead. In more fully socialized countries, famine was the start. The insignia announcing socialist rules in Soviet Russia, as in Red China, as in Cuba. In those countries, socialism reduced the people to the unspeakable poverty of the pre-industrial ages, to literal starvation, and has kept them on a stagnant level of misery. No, it is not just temporary, as socialism's apologists have been saying for half a century. After 45 years of government planning, Russia is still unable to solve the problem of feeding her population. As far as superior productivity and speed of economic progress are concerned, the question of any comparisons between capitalism and socialism has been answered once and for all for any honest person by the present difference between West and East Berlin. Instead of peace, socialism has introduced a new kind of gruesome lunacy into international relations, the Cold War, which is a state of chronic war with undeclared periods of peace between wantonly sudden invasions. Socialism may be established by the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics or by This is a reading of Ayn Rand, The Virtue of Selfishness, The Monument Builders. Instead of peace, socialism has introduced a new kind of gruesome lunacy into international relations. The Cold War, which is a state of chronic war with undeclared periods of peace between wantonly sudden invasions, with Russia seizing 1/3 of the globe, with socialist tribes and nations at one another's throats, with socialist India invading Goa, and communist China invading socialist India. An eloquent sign The moral corruption of our age is the callous complacency with which most of the socialists and the sympathizers, the liberals, regard the atrocities perpetrated in socialistic countries and accept rule by terror as a way of life, while posturing as advocates of human brotherhood. In the 1930s, they did protest against the atrocities of Nazi Germany, but apparently it was not an issue of principle, but only the protest of a rival gang fighting for the same territory because we do not hear their voices any longer. In the name of humanity, they condone and accept the following: the abolition of all freedom and all rights, the expropriation of all property, executions without trial, torture chambers, slave labor camps, the mass slaughter of countless millions in Soviet Russia, and the bloody horror of East Berlin, including the bullet-riddled bodies of fleeing children. When one observes the nightmare of the desperate efforts made by hundreds of thousands of people struggling to escape from the socialized countries of Europe, to escape over barbed wire fences, under machine gun fire, one can no longer believe that socialism, in any of its forms, is motivated by benevolence and by the desire to achieve man's welfare. No man of authentic benevolence could evade or ignore so great a horror on so vast a scale. Socialism is not a movement of the people. It is a movement of the intellectuals, originated, led, and controlled by the intellectuals, carried by them out of their stuffy ivory towers into those bloody fields of practice where they unite with the allies and executors, the thugs. What then is the motive of such intellectuals? Power lust. Power lust is a manifestation of helplessness, of self-loathing, and the desire for the unearned. The desire for the unearned has two aspects. Selfishness, the monument builders. Instead of peace. This is a reading of Ayn Rand's The Virtue of Selfishness, The Monument Builders, page 102. The desire for the unearned has two aspects: the unearned in matter and the unearned in spirit. By spirit, I mean man's consciousness. These two aspects are necessarily interrelated, but a man's desire may be focused predominantly on one or the other. The desire for the unearned in spirit is the more destructive of the two, and the more corrupt. It is a desire for unearned greatness. It is expressed but not defined by the foggy murk of the prestige. The seekers of unearned material benefits are merely financial parasites, moochers, looters, or criminals who are too limited in number and in mind to be a threat to civilization until and unless they are realized and legalized by the seekers of unearned greatness. Unearned greatness is so unreal, so neurotic a concept that the wretch who seeks it cannot identify it even to himself. To identify it is to make it impossible. He needs the irrational, undefinable slogans of altruism and collectivism to give a semi-plausible form to his nameless urge and anchor it to reality, to support his own self-deception more than to deceive his victims. The public interest, service to the public, are the means, the tools, the swinging pendulums of the power lusters self-hypnosis. Since there is no such entity as the public, since the public is merely a number of individuals, any claimed or implied conflict of the public interest with private interest means that the interests of some men are to be sacrificed to the interests and wishes of others. Since the concept is so conveniently undefinable, its use rests only on any given gang's ability to proclaim the public, sieste moi, and to maintain the claim at the point of a gun. No such claim has ever been or can ever be maintained without the help of a gun, that is, without physical force. But on the other hand, without their claim, gunmen would remain where they belong, in the underworld, and would not rise to the councils of state to rule the destinies of nations. There are two ways of claiming that the public sieste moi. One is practiced by the crude material parasite who clamors for government handouts in the name of a public need and pockets what he has not earned. The other is practiced by his leader, the spiritual parasite, one who derives his illusion of greatness like a fence receiving stolen goods, from the power to dispose of that which he has not earned, and from the mystic view of himself as the embodied voice of the public. Page 102. The desire for the unearned in matter. This is a reading from Ayn Rand, The Virtue of Selfishness, page 103 of the Monument Builders. Of the two, the material parasite is psychologically healthier and closer to reality. At least he eats or wears his loot. But the only source of satisfaction open to the spiritual parasite, his only means to gain prestige, apart from giving orders and spreading terror, is the most wasteful, useless, and meaningless activity of all, the building of public monuments. Greatness is achieved by the productive effort of a man's mind in the pursuit of clearly defined rational goals, but a delusion of grandeur can be served only by the switching, undefinable chimera of a public monument, which is presented as a munificent gift to the victims whose forced labor or extorted money had paid for it, which is dedicated to the service of all and none, owned by all and none, gaped at by all and enjoyed by none. This is the ruler's only way to appease his accession, prestige. Prestige in whose eyes? In anyone's. In the eyes of his tortured victims, of the beggars in the streets of his kingdom, of the bootlickers at his court, of the foreign tribes and the rulers beyond the borders. It is to impress all those eyes, the eyes of everyone and no one, that the blood of generations of subjects has been spilled and spent. One may see in certain biblical movies a graphic image of the meaning of public monument building, the building of the pyramids, hordes of starved, ragged, emaciated men straining the last effort of their inadequate muscles at the inhuman task of pulling the ropes that drag large chunks of stone, straining like tortured beasts of burden under the whips of overseers, collapsing on the job and dying in the desert sands, that a dead pharaoh might lie in an impossibly senseless structure, and thus gain eternal prestige in the eyes of the unborn of future generations. Temples and palaces are the only monuments left of mankind's early civilizations. They were created by the same means and at the same price, a price not justified by the fact that primitive peoples undoubtedly believed, while dying of starvation and exhaustion, that the prestige of their tribe, their rulers, or their gods was of value to them somehow. Rome fell bankrupted by statist controls and taxation, while its emperors were building colosseums. Louis XIV of France taxed his people into a state of indigence, while he built the Palace of Versailles for his contemporary monarchs to envy, and for modern tourists to visit. The marble-lined Moscow subway built by the unpaid volunteer labor of Russian workers, including women. The only source of satisfaction comes from the spiritual satisfaction. It's only means to gain prestige from giving orders and spread. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this reading. Go to ChicagoMayorVote.com.